Hi Year 10 and welcome to your final lesson on Christianity. It's entitled Persecution and Reconciliation and it's going to take you about 2 RS lessons. So can you put that title in your book or on your line paper or start a Word document with that as your title now please. Okay, so we're going to be looking at persecution of Christians both in the past and also at the present day. And we're also going to look at something about reconciliation and how the church has tried to bring all the different denominations of Christians together. We're also going to look at the World Council of Churches. So let's begin. Now, I don't want you to write anything for your starter, but I'd like you to think of a belief that you have that's really important to you and why. Imagine somebody said that you had to give up this belief or they would shoot you. What would you do? It's a tricky one, isn't it? If you were willing to give up this belief, why? If you weren't willing to give up your belief, if you weren't willing to give up your belief, why would you be prepared to give up your life for it? And what if you didn't give up your beliefs, then they would kill your loved ones? Would you give up your beliefs then? Now, persecution is a really horrible thing. And unfortunately, I'd love to tell you it doesn't happen anymore, but clearly it does. Now, just in case you're not sure, I'd like you to write a very simple definition of the word persecution using this to help you. Persecution means hostility or ill treatment, especially because of someone's race or religion or politics. It's a way that you oppress people. So can you press pause and write a definition of persecution in your book now, please? Okay, so now you've done that, I'd like you to start thinking about examples in the world of where people have been persecuted. Let's look at these images to help us. Yep, that's right, this is the persecution of Jews in the Second World War. This one is the Falun Gong religious movement in China. Not very nice. What about this one? Yeah, that's right, it's the KKK, the racist organisation. What about this one? Yep, this is the persecution of Rohingya Muslims in Burma or Myanmar. What about this one? Yeah, so this is the persecution of gay people, especially gay men in Uganda. Now, let's start thinking about why someone might face persecution, using those examples to help us. What I want you to do is press pause and make me a list of the different reasons somebody might face persecution. Off you go. Okay, let's have a look at your list. I've got religion, I've got race, I've got sexuality and politics. Is there anything else that you might add? If so, add it to your list. Okay, now we're going to start looking at the really kind of controversial, meaty topic of Christian persecution. So I want you to think about where in the world you think Christians have faced persecution, any time in the past or the present. And can you think of any reasons why someone might persecute Christians? Okay, what I'd like you to do, if you've printed this document off, I want you to have a read through it. If not, I'd like you to go on to Show My Homework and have a look at this on the screen. There's also a hyperlink at the top in blue, which you can go on, which just takes you to a GCSE history page for you to kind of deepen your knowledge. So have a little read through. If you have printed this off and you've got your book with you, stick that in your book now, please. What I'd like you to do when you've read through the sheet, I'd like you to just write a very small summary, a couple of sentences or a small paragraph, why early Christians were persecuted by the Roman Empire. And you get that information from reading this sheet. So can you go and write that for me now, please? Okay, so if you've resumed the video, you've done your little summary of why early Christians were persecuted. Let's bring it a bit more up to date, shall we, and look at modern persecution. So do you know where persecution of Christians is happening today? Any stories in the news? What I'd like you to do is write down a top 5 of the places in the world where you think it's the most dangerous to be a Christian. Off you go. Okay, so you've done some ideas. Here you go. Now, this is a world watch list created by a charity called Open Doors. We're going to do some more work on those later on. And this has basically highlighted every year. Open Doors produce this World Watch list, and it highlights that year the most dangerous places to be a Christian. So number 1 on our list is North Korea, number 2 is Afghanistan, and number 3 Somalia, number 4 Libya, number 5 Pakistan. I wonder how you did. How did you get on? Okay, now this link will be on Show My Homework. So I'd like you to look at this quick video clip of this news item, and I would like you to write a side heading that says Sri Lanka. Off you go. Okay, so you'll have watched the little clip. It's really sad, isn't it? So what I'd like you to do now, having a look, here's a funeral of those people who sadly died in that bombing of that church. And what I'd like you to do is to create a very small case study in your book. What happened in Sri Lanka, who was responsible, and why were Christians targeted? And you can literally do a what, who, why, and then next to it the answer. Press pause and off you go and do that for me. Okay, now let's look at China. So again, the YouTube clip will be on Show My Homework. Have a look at it now for me. Okay, so now you've looked at the China clip. I'd like you to write down how the Chinese government is persecuting Chinese Christians and why. Off you go. Okay, so now you've done your case studies on Sri Lanka and China. The next thing I'd like you to do is to have this worksheet to hand. I'd like you to stick it in if you have got your book, and if not, if you can print it, great. If not, you will be able to type into it the information you need to and save it. So I'd like you to find these parts of the passage on the left hand side, and then on the right hand side, ideally in a different colour, I'd like you to tell me what you think these parts of the scripture mean. So press pause while you do that. Okay, I'd like you to check your answers on your sheet with this answer sheet now. So the first section of this is talking about how those people preaching the Gospels will be vulnerable to persecution, and how it says that the Holy Spirit should be turned to guide Christians. Here it says that preaching will cause people to hate you, but if you stick to your ideas, you will be saved. This bit says that Christians should tell all people about the Word of God, and also to not be afraid, for if your body dies, your soul will live on. And then finally, it asks and says that if you renounce your faith, if you turn your back on God, then God will also turn his back on you. Okay, now here are some additional quotes. These are really important if you're trying to achieve a grade 6 or higher. And what I'd like you to do is to stick them in and to think about and consider how they help Christians today to deal with persecutions. How would these quotes help Christians? Here's a bigger version if you want to write them in your book. Okay, now you're going to need the pages from your remote learning pack, pages 214 to 215. I'd like you to read through that information, and then I'd like you to answer these questions, please. What Christian groups are trying to prevent and fight persecution? Okay, once you've done that question, I'd like you, using the link on Show My Homework, to go on to the Open Doors video clip and to check out that charity. And then I'd like you to write the title Open Doors in your book. Off you go. Okay, so now you've watched the clip on Open Doors, I want you to use this information here and answer this question. What does Open Doors do, and what action does Open Doors take against persecution of Christians? Okay, so let's recap. Now, earlier on this term, we looked at different branches or denominations of Christianity. Can you name me any denominations of Christianity? Oh, there's so many. See if you can remember this picture, although my picture I drew was less good. So you could have had Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, Church of England, Baptist, Quakers, there's so many. Now, I want you to think about whether you think that the different Christian groups have always got along with each other, Can you think of any examples where there's been conflict or tension between different Christian groups? See if you can identify the following examples. So, example 1, the English Reformation. Now, this caused issues because Henry VIII broke away from the Catholic Church, and he also dissolved a lot of the monasteries and also persecuted a lot of English Catholics. He made it illegal to be a Catholic, and here's an example of one of the monasteries. So, in your book, if you just do a little side heading that says examples of conflict and then the Reformation. Look at this, some poor priests being boiled alive and even having their heads chopped off. Not very nice, is it? Now, the second example I want you to jot down is Northern Ireland. And Northern Ireland is a really good example of a place where there's been conflict between Christian denominations, and this is known as the Troubles. You might have heard of it. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, this is a really complex issue. It's way more than just about religion, but historically there's been a lot of violence between Catholics and Protestants. And here are some examples. So this is a bombing. You can see the body here under a coat here. And I certainly remember as a kid, you know, not being able to go on a school trip because of the threats of bombs. Manchester city centre was actually completely blown up by an IRA bomb. And those of you who've got family and loved ones in Northern Ireland, these are the kinds of things even today that you see painted on houses. Now, the third example we're going to look at is Glasgow. And football fans amongst you will actually know this already, but there's been a lot of violence between Catholics and Protestants in Glasgow. And this often raises its head at football matches between Rangers and Celtic, the two big football groups. Ooh. The PowerPoint's being a bit sticky. So here's some graffiti, kill all Catholics. Pretty shocking, really. And here's a football stands. And often this is what ensues when they play each other. It's pretty messy. Now, conflict between different denominations isn't, though, always violent. So people, you know, Christians can disagree with each other, but disagree with their ideas. Can you think of any examples of differences between different Christian groups based on what we've done so far? Right, I want you to make some notes on the following. So here are some differences that I've thought of. First of all, the differences of opinion around things like homosexuality, divorce and contraception. These are all things we'll be looking at sort of May time this year. So there are really different views within Christianity about being gay, getting a divorce. There's also theological differences. So another difference that I've done, and you could do this as a mind map if you wanted to, is the different Christian ideas about the communion or the Eucharist, you know, like Catholics, transubstantiation, but other Christians don't believe that. Then you've got the difference in practices. So some churches baptise babies, some don't, and do believers' baptism. So that's another example of a difference. So, question for you. Do you think that this conflict and disagreement between Christians is what Jesus originally intended for his church? Of course it wasn't. Now, what I'd like you to do is to read through in your remote learning pack, page 215, and read the information on reconciliation. And reconciliation is your title. And then I'd like you to answer these questions. What does reconciliation actually mean? And why is there a need in modern society for Christians to work together? Okay, then I'd like you to write a new title, The Ecumenical Movement, and I'd like you to read the information on page 215 and 216 in your remote learning pack about what the ecumenical movement is, and then I'd like you to answer these questions. What does ecumenical mean, and what are the main aims of the ecumenical movement? What have been the positive outcomes of the ecumenical movement as well? Okay, can you go and answer those questions now for me, please? Okay, the final bit in our whistle stop tour is the World Council of Churches. So can you write that title for me? And have you ever heard of it? What do you think that they might do? So what I'd like you to do is to read that section on the World Council of Churches on pages 215 and 216, and then I'd like you to answer these questions. What is the WCC, or the World Council of Churches, and which church is not a member? What has the WCC led to in the UK? Okay. Now there's some additional information on this worksheet about the World Council of Churches, so have a little read through that, and if you have got that as a printout you can stick that into your book. Now, final thoughts really. What do you think Jesus would think about the ecumenical movement and the World Council of Churches? I kind of think it was a good idea, not something he wished didn't need to happen perhaps, but a good idea, things that are trying to bring Christians together rather than to sort of divide them. Okay, now there are some extra teachings here on ecumenism, and what I'd like you to do is to just, in the space underneath each of the quotes, just have a little think about how these teachings support this idea of Christians working together rather than against each other. There's a bigger version of the same sheet if you want it. Okay, now we're pretty much at the end of the lesson now. So the final thing for you to do is to have a go at these exam questions. Describe the ecumenical movement. So remember the technique of gimme 5. And then using the answering C question worksheet as well, what I'd like you to do is to have a go at answering this question. Now use the planning sheet which we've attached to show my homework. Have a little read through it, see if that makes sense, and then when you've done both these questions, can you please send them to your RS teacher so that we can mark them and give them to you as feedback. Thank you ever so much. Okay, a final thought. This could be a D question. It is the duty of Christians to stand up for their faith, even in the face of extreme persecution. I wonder what thoughts and ideas you have around that. Why would someone agree with that? Why would someone disagree with that? Okay, so there's quite a lot that's come out of these two lessons. The fact that Christians are still persecuted today, and that actually is still the biggest threat to Christians. It's persecution, which I'm imagining quite a lot of you didn't realise. The other part of the lesson is about reconciliation and how, despite its differences, many churches, many Christians are trying to do all that they can to reunite the church and to overcome their problems. Remember, that is at the heart of reconciliation. Thank you so much for all your hard work. I hope you've enjoyed your Christianity course, and that is the end of Christianity. Over the next couple of lessons you'll be doing revision, and then we will be giving you an exam, a mini exam to complete to assess your knowledge over this entire section of Christian practices. Take care, keep safe, and thank you for your hard work. Bye bye.